The first question today is, what happens after self-realization? How does life go on? This is a much more difficult question than what is enlightenment, which itself is a difficult one. Now, basically, according to my concept, self-realization or enlightenment means only one thing. It does not mean the acquisition of powers. It does not mean being able to heal people, cure people, see into the future. For me, it only means just one thing, and that is the total destruction of the sense of personal doership in the ego. The total, absolute, deepest conviction that I am not the doer of actions happening through my body, nor is anyone else the doer of actions happening through his or her body. According to my concept, therefore, self-realization is an extremely simple thing. It means only the destruction of the sense of personal doership. And the other thing is, that is not something the ego can acquire. Self-realization is an event in life which can only happen, like all other events, only if it is the will of God and the destiny of the body-mind organism concerned. And for that, the most important, again, first step is, you have never been a spiritual seeker. Spiritual seeking has happened, again, as one of the events in life. Spiritual seeking has happened through particular body-mind organisms at the will of God, and therefore the source or God had created those particular body-mind organisms with such programming that this kind of spiritual seeking will happen. Therefore, spiritual seeking has started not because of you, but in spite of you. So the progress of the seeking should obviously be left to that power which started the seeking, which means less tension for the fictitious spiritual seeker. Heiner is suggesting that I take my glasses off. But he doesn't know that I have been a banker for 37 years. And part of my training has been to be one step ahead. This is the one step ahead I've got to read. So what I was about to say is, I never had given much thought to what happens after life, after the understanding happens. Again, a very simple reason. There is no one concerned. Life just happened. I saw no reason to investigate any changes. But the questions have happened. And the first question that came in for today's talk was this: what happens to life after understanding happens? So this time I did give it some thought, and because I might forget, for the simple reason that I have no concern with it, I jotted down certain points. So, the first point is, what happens after the understanding? There is a confirmed happening in life, and that confirmed happening in life is that this body-mind organism participates in life like all body-mind organisms. But in participating in life, the big difference is that the ego, the identification with a body-mind organism and a name as a separate entity, I repeat, as a separate entity, continues to partake in life, accepting the pains and pleasures as they happen, as the will of God, and the destiny of this body-mind organism. But the important point is, life is participated in with the awareness that life is a sort of movie on the screen of consciousness. In other words, what I'm saying is, while participating in the movie of life, watching the character play its role in the movie, the sense is never absent. The awareness is never absent that it is the screen which is the reality on which the movie is happening. There is never an absence of awareness of the screen which is the reality on which the movie of life happens. That awareness is never, ever absent. So whatever changes happen is because of this no absence of the awareness of the screen of consciousness. Whatever changes are brought about is by this awareness. Otherwise, life goes on. Life has gone on. My wife and I have lived our lives as before, including sex. I can't say that self-realization has made me a better lover. Nor have I been told so. So for practical purposes, life has gone on more or less like before. But this awareness, constant, never failing awareness of the screen of consciousness on which the movie of life happens, has brought about some changes. One is the lack of tension. Knowing that the movie is taking its course and no power on earth has the ability to hurt me in any way. No power on earth has the ability to catch me with my pants down unless it is the will of God. Has brought about a certain change. And that is dropping of a guard. At least in my case, the programming was always a certain guard against the world. That is my programming. I have to be careful. So this guard that has always been open, with this understanding, has dropped. There is more openness. And that openness has sometimes created slight difficulties. But nonetheless, the natural timidity or fear of the world has gone a great deal, which has made this body-mind organism more open, more frank. And that I have seen being noticed by others. That is the one definite change which I have noticed and others have noticed. Next point is, I have noticed that my sensitivity to the world, sensitivity to the existence of others, I said enlightenment does not, I keep repeating, does not break down the separation between entities. It continues. What has happened is, my sensitivity towards others has increased, which in practical terms means more concern about others, more giving, more compassion. The arising of compassion or not is part of the programming. But I have noticed that there is an increase in the sensitivity in this body-mind object. There is greater sensitivity for others. Again, possibly for the same reason. The guard is down. So if no one can hurt me, there is no reason for me to be afraid of them, to guard against them. And if someone else suffers, then that also I have noticed. Help has gone out spontaneously. To the extent that it was possible for me, the help has gone out spontaneously. Some time ago, last year, there was a war with Pakistan. Whatever word may be used, there was a war with Pakistan. And on the TV showed the number of soldiers being killed in Kargil. The TV showed that the Pakistanis had taken over positions at a higher level. And the Indians had to go up along with the air power. But as they were going up, they were being shot down like flies. The scene was on the TV. I felt for them. And immediately there was a thought, I should do something. I should give some substantial donation. Whom do I give the donation? It was quite well known that there is rampant corruption in India. Now, for some time, I've gathered there is rampant corruption in Germany also. And all over the world. In the Olympic Committee, wherever you look at, there is corruption. So my difficulty was, where do I send the donation? Then came the answer, spontaneously. That is another thing which has been happening. Answers come at the appropriate time. The very next day, an advertisement came in the Times of India, big one, Army Welfare Fund, which was to be dealt with by the army itself. That came the next day. So when I was looking at it, my wife and I were looking at it. So my wife said, I told my wife, look, I think I'll tomorrow send them a check of 100,000 rupees. My wife said, how much? I said, 100,000 rupees. She said, very good. Quite honestly, I don't know whether this kind of gesture would have happened earlier. Same thing happens other charities. So, donations come in large numbers. I have more wealth than I know what to do with in my life. That also happens. And I'll also confess that when a substantial donation comes, there's a great deal of pleasure. I've sometimes analyzed that pleasure, and I've come to the conclusion that that pleasure is not just from my personal sense, which is there. Just as if I see the teaching reaching someone's heart deeply, there is a sense of pleasure. And in the talks I say there is a sense of pleasure, but there is no pride. So the sense of pleasure in a donation is there. Also maybe I've been dealing with money for 37 years. So money is not a bad thing. But now, the going of those donations also is there. I'll tell you what happened was. My wife, 3 years ago, had a very serious illness. She was in the hospital, in the intensive care unit, which I think is expensive anywhere in the world. And so was it in Bombay. Very expensive. And then, as the expenses were climbing up, one gentleman from Spain came. I never knew him. He heard that my wife was in a hospital and it's extremely expensive. So he just walks in after the talk, smiling, a lovely personality. And he hands me a bunch of American dollars and says, I hope this will help you a little for the hospital expenses. So I said, I'm sure it will. I thanked him. That evening, when I went to see my wife in the hospital, she had tubes in her nose, in her mouth, so she couldn't talk. But she was also concerned. It was, I think, third or fourth day. For 3 days she was unconscious. Then when she saw me, she says, what about money? So I told her, no problem. Money, no problem, money comes. So she made another gesture. You see? So life has been certainly not easy, but difficulties come, and consciousness has been dealing with the difficulties through this body-mind organism. I'm not saying that I just did nothing. The next point is, desires arise, but they are not pursued. That came up yesterday. Even in a sage, desires have to arise, because desires, thoughts, feelings, they arise. No one can create them. So the desires arise, but I have not been pursuing them. Some desires have been satisfied, some have not been satisfied. But the important thing is, I think, after this understanding, that the life as it happens is really an illusion. And that understanding is again based on the life of the movie happening on the screen of consciousness. The basis of which is, as Ramana Maharshi has said, and others, nothing has happened. There is no creation, no dissolution. So with the understanding that everything is an illusion, that a desire not being satisfied does not turn out to be such a calamity. Knowing that life is not real, life is only an appearance, life is only an illusion, total acceptance of that has resulted in a desire not being satisfied, not seeming a calamity. All right, a desire not. There's another thing. Desires have arisen, they have to arise. But I've also noticed this morning that even the arising of desires has been much less. So this morning, first time I've thought about it, I've made notes, and I'm laying it all out before you. After that, if there are still any questions, you are most welcome to ask me. I asked Wayne this morning about this. He hadn't thought about it much either. Then he was having a massage session. And during the massage session, he says, it thought, and he says, Ramesh, the tension has been much less. So I said, thank you very much. I have given it a little more thought. So, the next point I have is the usual criterion of morality and integrity, which bothers an average person a great deal, more than one would think or imagine or even confess. The criterion of morality and integrity. In these circumstances, what is the moral path for me? What is the integrity? The question of integrity often is confused. Integrity to this, integrity to my assistant, or integrity to my employer. There was a case once. Someone called me from the States. Fortunately, she had made the decision before she called me. Otherwise, my suggestion to him could have been different. Her point was the same thing. It was decided in a committee of which she was a member that one of her able assistants had done something wrong according to the established rules. So, the committee decided that she should be punished, he should be punished. Now, the question before this lady was, as the administrative head, to warn the assistant, that would be integrity towards a fellow employee, or not to warn him, because warning him would go against the integrity to the employer. So, this question of integrity often baffles one. So, in this case, what has been happening is the very criterion of integrity and morality baffles me less and less and less. Any decision to be made happens, any action to be taken happens. And whoever it hurts, if it hurts anyone, there is no guilt of any kind. So, along with the sensitivity, this has also happened. A disregard, almost a disregard. I wouldn't say a deliberate disregard, but a spontaneous disregard of the criterion of morality and integrity. The decisions and actions have been more spontaneous. There is an abhanga, bhajan, which is sung at my place every morning. About 5 or 6 bhajans are said. And in one of them, he was not an Advaiti sage, he was a saint. He was called Gora Kumbhar. Gora was his name, Kumbhar means a potter. So he is a potter. And while he was doing his work, Abhangas came out and his wife jotted them down. And one of the Abhanga, a saint who is not a philosopher or who is not truly concerned with the technical aspect of integrity or morality, he says in the Abhanga, every born human being has a certain nature. I call it programming. The simple potter called it the nature inherent in that body-mind organism. Every born human being has a nature of his own. And he dares to say, I've often admired the courage of that man. And it's a Abhanga which he said, in all Abhanga, usually the name of the poet is mentioned. So he says, Gora says, very clearly. And he has the courage to say that all that the human being has to do is to follow his nature. Meaning, let the programming in that body-mind organism be the instrument through which the functioning power will work. And he says in the next line, there is no question of good behavior or good morality. Many years ago, 200-300 years ago, this simple potter has the courage to tell, so long as you follow your nature more accurately, so long as you let God function through this body-mind organism according to its nature, there is no question for you of any criterion of good conduct or morality or integrity. When I first heard it, I was so moved that a simple potter has this intuitive understanding that there is no question of really of morality or integrity. And we find that it differs from religion to religion, locality to locality, country to country. So this actually comes out into practice. I've never felt the need for the number of years to question my decision or action from the point of view of morality or integrity. There never has been any decision to be made which has not been made spontaneously. And the spontaneous decision would naturally be based on the conditioning. Therefore, I really was not concerned with the decision. And that is the real understanding. No one makes a decision. The next point is, grief happens, but does not degenerate into mourning. Does the sage feel grief? Yes, of course he feels grief. A sage would feel grief if his pet dog of 15 years suddenly died. The grief would be more if his son dies, a grown-up son dies. Of course there would be grief. But the grief is not the ego grieving. Grief arises when the thought of the dead son becomes the input in the body-mind organism. The brain reacts to the reminder of the son's death. Grief arises in that moment. It may continue for a moment or so, but then the understanding comes up and stops the grieving. Then you are in the next moment. Next moment could well be, and it is, a friend coming up, and then I share a meal with him or something. And the grief is really totally forgotten in the next moment. But the grief does arise. There was a friend of mine who had the biggest library on spiritual books I had known. This was some 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And he considers himself a jnani, a sage. And it was quite amusing to me to see the arrogance of this sage. Including the acted humility he would show. So when his wife of 55 years died, I didn't go and see him immediately. I went and saw him 8 or 10 days later. And when I entered his room, he suddenly stood up and burst out crying. Then we sat down and he said, Ramesh, this is what is happening. 8 or 10 days now. And the moment I saw you, I burst out crying. So he was complaining that his grief had lasted 8 or 10 days. And this shouldn't happen in the case of a sage. So I think what really grieved him, it is probably not very kind, but the thought did strike me then that this man's grief is not so much for his wife, but for himself, that he has been exposed. This grief for his wife has exposed him as not being a sage. Anyway, the grief was there. So we talked for a while. Then when I came home, again a spontaneous action, I went straight to my desk, wrote him a very short note, which I sent to him, in which I said, I share his grief in his wife's death, but I cannot help saying that if he had, the grief came because he loved his wife. If he had not loved his wife, this grief would not have been there. And you would have considered yourself a sage. Sometime later, he told me, he was a well-known man, journalist. So he said, Ramesh, I literally had hundreds of condolence letters. I only kept 3, and one of the 3 is yours. So the arising of the grief is one thing, but it is the ego who takes hold of the momentary grief, carries it into horizontal duration, and converts it into a mourning. So where a sage is concerned, according to my concept, grief does arise. But if the understanding is there, it doesn't get turned into mourning. Next point I have is no fear of death or loss of someone. This came to me forcibly one evening, again during my wife's illness. It was a serious illness. She had 2 4-hour operations. And my daughter, who was then here, she lives in Bangalore. My son lives separately in another apartment of his. And before the operation, which was really serious, my daughter comes to me. I happen to be watching the TV as usual. Instead of worrying about it, which I knew wouldn't do me any good, my daughter comes to me and says, "Look, Father, we'll see that you are not left alone in case something happens." And curiously, I didn't say it, but I knew it. It didn't worry me. It didn't worry me because the screen of consciousness was never absent. So whether it is me or my son or my wife, they're all characters in the movie who have to go when they're supposed to go. So this never absence, the absence of unawareness, of awareness in the screen has always, and that was proved to me, that's what I'm trying to tell you, that was proved to me at that moment. When the possibility of my wife's death didn't really send me into shivers. And the same later on, it turned out that during the operation, the kidneys suddenly failed for no reason. So the surgeon stopped the operation, came out, discussed the matter with my son, and they agreed that it was no use putting her on a machine for a living death. My son agreed. But when the doctor went back, the surgeon went back, for some reason again, the kidneys had started functioning. So the operation was completed and another one the next day. And she is now, which the doctor confirms, in better health than she was when she went to the hospital. You see? So events in my life also have proved that not being afraid of life, because life happens not according to my will or your will, but according to the cosmic law of God's will. And life will continue to function exactly as it is supposed to. That awareness, that total conviction means you're not in fear of life. Life doesn't have any terrors for you. And if life doesn't have terrors for you, how can death have terrors for you? So the total understanding, self-realization, if you will, means, in practical terms, absence of fear of life and therefore absence of fear of death. Yes, and one last thing is, I have noticed that I see humor in situations, including myself, let me say in fairness to myself, I see humor in situations when I never saw one before. Some time ago, I saw something which I think was one of the funniest things you can imagine. I was invited to a dinner with a friend. He is a rich industrialist, multimillionaire. There were lots of guests. Huge house, many guests. Drinks were served, starters were on, and in there comes a man, Nice personality, tall man, tall, dark, handsome man, who wore a lungi, the South Indian, they wrap themselves in nothing, and a jubba, walking around with such arrogance. And it turned out that he was the family guru. Walking around with such arrogance that people should ask, who is this man? And they did. So, guru of a multimillionaire, that's something. Guru for you or me is one thing. But the guru for a multimillionaire, the arrogance with which he was walking, I honestly thought it was the funniest thing I ever saw. Why? Because I was seeing an arrogant robot. Have you ever seen, can you imagine an arrogant robot? That's how I saw him, an arrogant robot. And to me, it was the funniest sight. Yes, so on this point, if you have any questions, please ask.
I don't understand how you can, I just get hung up on this part about how nothing can hurt me anymore.
Yes, yes.
Because we go through times in our lives where we have severe loss and severe emotional pain,
yes.
Sometimes life-threatening severe emotional pain.
Yes, yes.
And it hurts, the body hurts tremendously.
No, wait a minute. What point are we talking about? I'm not saying that there is no pain in life. You see, I'm not saying there is no distress in life. I'm not saying there is no hurt in life. But what I'm saying is, no one has the power to hurt anyone else. Unless the hurt will happen not because someone wants to hurt you and is in a position to hurt you, but only because, simply because and only because it is your destiny to be hurt. And it is destiny means the will of God or according to the cosmic law. In other words, you will be hurt only if you are supposed to be hurt according to the cosmic law. Not because someone thinks he hates you and he has the power to hurt you and he thinks he has used the power to hurt you. He may think so. But what has actually happened according to my total understanding is that hurt could not have happened unless it was the will of God. You see? However powerful your enemy, nothing he can do unless it is the will of God that you be hurt. And it is the destiny of this body-mind organism to be hurt at that time, at that place, through a particular instrument. Yes? That is why. No instrument has the power to hurt you.
Well, I understand that intellectually, and I just, of course, the body wants to find a way out of it.
Oh, that is...
You know, how to shorten that pain.
The body or the ego wants to avoid pain. Certainly. That is what the ego is supposed to do. Try to avoid pain and achieve pleasure. That is what the ego tries to do. And all I'm saying is, it is not up to the ego to do anything, either to achieve happiness or to avert pain. The pain and pleasure are part of the destiny of the body, mind, organism and the will of God. You see? That is my point. The ego can do nothing either to achieve success or pleasure or happiness, nor to avoid and try to avert the unhappiness. That is my point. It is the duty of the ego, it is the nature of the ego to try to do both. Achieve happiness, avert unhappiness. That is what the ego is supposed to do. And that is the sense of personal doership. But the understanding is that whatever happens, pleasure or pain, is not the success of the ego or the failure of the ego, but that it is entirely a matter of the destiny of the body, mind, organism and the will of God. You see, in last year, or maybe 2 years, in India there was a horrible event happened in a state called Orissa, where a missionary called Staines and his 2 sons were locked up in a car and the car was set fire to. They both died. The reporters went as usual to the widow, the bereaved widow and the bereaved mother, and asked her about it. And I was amazed at the depth of understanding which that widow showed. All she said was, all I know and accept is that the length of time for my husband and my kids allotted to them by God was over at that moment. You see, that was her reaction. The depth of understanding in that woman was something I marveled at. And she was a Catholic missionary. She too, the wife too, was a Catholic missionary. So, what the reporters expected, I'm sure, was, how could God have done this to my husband and children? How could the merciful God have done this to me? It was as if it is the duty of the merciful God to be kind to you all the time, kind to all people all the time. And yet, that truly is the belief of many missionaries. Have you read the book Sin and Guilt?
Not yet.
The book is all about this. I'll tell you the history of the book. A young lady who comes with her boyfriend 6 months in the year, once gathered that her parents were on a visit to India, on a world visit or something, and they were coming to Bombay. So she begged of them to spend a week in Bombay with her. The parents came. The father, I'm not sure Catholic or Protestant, but a Christian. Such tremendous resistance that I gathered later that many of the other visitors in the afternoon, when they would gather at the swimming pool, would form a coterie to try to persuade this man. The resistance was so hard. He went back with that resistance. And, and all the other visitors were sorely disappointed that they couldn't pierce that resistance. So when he went back, he sent a book, a copy of a book called The Will of God to his daughter. And the daughters came to me with the book and say, Ramesh, read this book. I haven't had such fun in all my life. Because what the book said, and of course, now let me, yes, on the book was marked 850,000 copies sold. And the book, would you believe it, the whole book was, the will of God cannot be accepted as the will of God unless it is to be understood. It is very deep. The will of God, thy will be done, is such a deep principle that it needs to be interpreted. Thy will be done. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. No, it is not so simple as that. It isn't. It needs to be interpreted. And that's what the book did, you see. Circumstantial will of God. Then something else will of God. And then the ultimate will of God. And the will of God which prevails is only the ultimate will of God. And what is the ultimate will of God? What I want. So, this book contains, I think you will enjoy this book if you have time to read. I forget. But 850,000 copies sold should be no difficulty in finding the. And I would be surprised if 5,000 copies of the Siren Guild are sold. Yes.
You said the screen of consciousness is always there. And I would like to ask you, how is it in sleep? Are you know that you are sleeping? Are you knowing that you are dreaming? And are you knowing that you are in deep sleep? Like an underlying knowing?
Yes. So what is the question? How do you get something, you said?
Is there an underlying knowing of the screen of consciousness even when you're in deep sleep?
Yes.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Indeed, yes. You see, for a very simple reason. In deep sleep, your consciousness as an individual entity is absent. The me is absent. The me as identified consciousness is absent. Yet, when you wake up, this entity, this individual entity who was absent in deep sleep, is able to say, I slept well or I did not sleep well. How could this identified entity be able to say he slept well or didn't sleep well unless there was some awareness in which the entity was absent? You see? So in deep sleep, this personal awareness is absent, but the impersonal awareness, I am, is present all the time. It has to be. I am is the impersonal consciousness existing all the time in phenomenality, functioning through every body-mind organism and bringing out such actions as are supposed to happen according to the programming in each body-mind organism. So that impersonal consciousness or consciousness which functions through each body-mind organism, that is the one which is always present, including in deep sleep.
Thank you.
Okay.
everything what happens to us and what we do is the best, and the only thing we have to do is to accept it.
Only thing you have to do is to accept it is yes. But whether it is the best, it may be really the best in the long run. You see, that we can never know. We are only concerned with at the moment. So whether it is at the best or not, and best at what time, and not best at what time, one cannot know. You see? But all I can say is, whatever happens, happens because it is supposed to happen at that time, and no power on earth could have avoided it. That is my concept. Any action that happens, which the individual concerned may consider good or bad or indifferent, could not have been avoided. If any action has happened, it has happened only because it had to happen according to the will of God or the cosmic law. Yes.
Very close, yeah. To the awareness, you say there is a personal and an unpersonal awareness, just before.
Yes. Consciousness, yes.
In the deep sleep, there's unpersonal awareness.
Yes, that's right.
And in the awakened state,
There is the identified or personal consciousness.
personal awareness.
Identified or personal consciousness.
You use the word consciousness or awareness. It's the same.
Consciousness is for the source from which consciousness at rest has become consciousness in movement. And consciousness in movement is the identified consciousness in each human being, which is present in the waking state and the dreaming state, but absent in the deep sleep state, in which state the personal identified consciousness is absent, and the impersonal consciousness, which is present at all times and functions through every body-mind organism, is always present even in deep sleep. That is what I mean.
Is the word awareness and the word consciousness,
Yes.
is different?
No, I mean the same thing.
The same thing.
I mean the same thing. You
Yes.
use awareness. You see, what is more, what I'm saying is, what do I mean by the word consciousness or awareness? It is the source, one without a second, from which the entire manifestation has emerged. So you can call it the source, you can call it consciousness, you can call it awareness, you can call it the noumenon, you can call it the absolute, you can call it God, or as the scientists would prefer, you could call it potential energy which has activated itself. Energy, impersonal energy. You could call it whatever you like, but the understanding is it is the source, the only reality from which this unreal appearance has emerged.
So the unpersonal consciousness or the unpersonal awareness in deep sleep has no object.
Has no objective.
No objective.
No,
Not at all.
not at all. The objective comes only when some act has to be, activity, some action has to be produced through a particular body-mind organism. And then that action happens according to the cosmic law or according to God's will and the destiny of the body-mind organism through which that action happens.
So the unpersonal awareness or consciousness in deep sleep has no object. This is no object. And you say in the waking state there is a personal awareness or consciousness. It's not unpersonal.
Yes, let me put it this way. Even in the waking state, it is the impersonal consciousness which has identified itself with a particular body-mind organism and has become the identified ego consciousness, to claim any action that happens and is created by the impersonal consciousness. The ego is hypnotized, divinely hypnotized, into accepting that action which has been brought about by the source as his individual action. I hope that's clear. I've tried.
Yes. Now only my question is,
Yes.
the personal awareness in the ordinary man has objects of the universe, of the manifestation. The manifestation is the object of the awareness of the ordinary man. Is this right?
The identified consciousness considers that life exists for his benefit, and it is up to him to do whatever he can to achieve happiness and avert unhappiness. That is what the ego, the identified consciousness, tries to do, and is happy when he is successful and unhappy when he is not. Therefore, the happiness and unhappiness happens in life.
Right. My question is, I beg your pardon, it's not only to the awareness, the personal awareness. You use the word personal awareness in the waking state. Is the personal awareness of the ordinary man must be different from the personal awareness of the sage?
Personal awareness of the
sage.
Sage. You see, the individual identified consciousness is individual, and that is the hypnotized ego, which he considers himself the individual. In the case of a sage, that is exactly what has been destroyed. In the case of a sage, what has been destroyed, what makes a sage is the total, deepest possible conviction that there is no ego, there is no identified consciousness, that all there is the one consciousness, which is the functioning element in every body-mind organism. Therefore, there can be no individual action. All actions are part of the functioning of manifestation, the functioning of the source through the many body-mind organisms. That is what the sage believes. What the sage believes is, in the words of the Buddha, events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. That is what the sage believes. So that there is no individual who does anything.
Is this only a belief of the sage, or does he really, is he aware of this?
Let us say that is the experience of the sage.
Experience, yeah.
That is the experience of the sage. And that's what we have been talking about for the first 40 minutes. How does this total conviction of the absence of the ego, in the case of a sage, functions in life? That is his personal experience, based on the total deepest conviction that no individual exists as a doer, either himself or anyone else. Neither he is the doer nor anyone else.
Thank you.
Most welcome. Indrani.
Thank you. Ramesh?
Yes.
If you say all there is consciousness, which means all there is consciousness?
Yes, all there is consciousness.
Which means all there is source?
Yes.
And out of the source
has come
the manifestation.
Yes, of which the human beings are a part.
Right. So we are part of the manifestation.
Yes.
And I don't get, if we are part of the manifestation,
Yes.
which is the source,
Yes.
why do we speak about on one side of the creator and on the other side of the created object, which is two?
Because the one who says this is the ego. Ego created by the source, associated with every individual, as identified with each individual as an individual entity with the sense of personal doership. Why has the source created the ego with a sense of personal doership? Because without the ego, which is identification with a personal sense of doership, interhuman relationships will not happen. And interhuman relationships are the very basis of life. So for life to happen, interhuman relationships have to happen. Interhuman relationships to happen, egos have to be there. And all that the sage does is to find out from deepest personal experience the conviction that the ego is not necessary for life to happen. That is all that the sage comes to the conclusion from experience. Any ego in any body mind is not necessary for life to happen. That indeed life actually happens without the need of any ego. But the ego considers his actions his, someone else's actions someone else's, therefore judges between the two, comes to the conclusion that my actions are good, his actions are bad, I should be rewarded, he should be punished. And when that doesn't happen, he becomes unhappy. So the ego is a fictitious character created by God through divine hypnosis so that interhuman relationships should happen and life as we know it should happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I understand this whole point of awakening that you see that you are not the doer, God is doing, and
Yes.
the people think they are doing.
Yes.
But it's God who's doing.
And that is because of the divine hypnosis of the
yes,
ego.
Sure.
Yes.
And this is the whole point.
Yeah.
If you know this, then all other collapses.
That is correct. But the only thing I would add is this, that it is not in your control
Not in my control.
to acquire this total acceptance that you are not the doer. But if it happens, then life, as I told you, becomes simple. Simple and open and spontaneous.
You mean the total acceptance that all is God's will?
Even the happening of that is God's will.
Yes, and my knowing is my wisdom to this.
I'm sorry?
That I know deeply that all is God's will.
Yes.
This,
That is all that is necessary to happen. All that is necessary to happen for what to happen? For life to happen, continue to happen. But what I'm saying is, accepting that you are not the doer, no one else is a doer, I must confess that that is not a promise that in your life all unhappiness will stop. See, I want to make it perfectly clear. This and all that this understanding does is to remove the load, in the personal load of pride and arrogance, guilt and pride and arrogance for deeds which you think you have done, guilt and shame for actions which you think you should not have done.
It cannot be. It's God's will. It is
So,
done.
if you understand that it is not no action, then there is no pride, there is no guilt, There is no hatred for anyone. So life becomes simple with the absence of the load on the mind of pride, guilt, hatred, jealousy.
I think this is the best psychology, the best work what a psycholog can do.
And we can only hope that it happens in the case of everybody. Yes.
If you
Yeah.
say that everything is divine,
Yes.
the ego mind is divine too.
Yes.
And if you find out that in one process, step of evolution, that the ego mind is not necessary, is it not so that we would say then something God has created is not necessary? I mean, the ego mind.
The
Would you say-
ego mind comes to the conclusion that no ego is capable of doing anything. The final understanding of the ego, self-realization means the ego himself coming to the conclusion, ego herself coming to the conclusion, absolute total conviction that for life to happen, the ego is totally unnecessary. And therefore the ego does not exist.
Yes, but don't we say then that God created something that is not necessary?
Yes, it is necessary for life to happen. So, God or the source created the egos so that interhuman relationship should happen and life as we know it should happen. But also as part of that same life in which God created the egos with a sense of personal doership, it is the same God or source who started the process.
So it is necessary to see that it is not necessary.
It is necessary to see the whole picture, that it is God who created the ego through divine hypnosis, that the ego is truly not necessary. And finding this out is the process which the source has already started. When the source created the ego with a sense of personal doership, the source also started the process of destroying this sense of personal doership in a limited number of egos.
So then you can say that,
And for those body-mind organisms through which the spiritual seeking is happening, the source created those body-mind organisms with such a unique programming that this kind of seeking can happen. So the source or God created the ego with a sense of personal doership, and it is the same source or God who is destroying the sense of personal doership in a limited number of egos, so that most of the egos will carry on the job of living and producing interhuman relationships.
so it has only been created to see that it is not necessary. But that's the point.
But in a limited number of cases.
Thank you.
You see? So
Yes.
that in the other millions of cases, life goes on in the belief that he or she does it, and therefore he or she creates interhuman relationships. And life based on interhuman relationships continues, except for a very few damn fools who think they are not doing anything.
And a man cannot understand why the whole play goes on.
Why the whole thing has happened?
Yes, I can say it is a play for God, but
Yes.
it's
Why
not-
is God
why,
playing
why
this
I
game?
don't know, and I cannot know.
You cannot know. That is the point. Why do you think you cannot know, my friend? It's absolutely true that you cannot know. Why? Because the one who wants to know is one created object in the created manifestation which is the totality of billions of created objects. And a created object can never know why the entire creation has been created and on what basis the creation has been created. A created object can never know the basis on which the creator's will functions.
And it is not important to think about other how things could be or could function, or
if you mean the why is irrelevant, I would say yes.
Mhm.
The why God is doing this is irrelevant. But trying to find out why God is doing what He is doing,
impossible.
the ego can be unhappy. And that unhappiness is the destiny of that ego who wants to know why.
If I understand you correctly, Ramesh. Here. Here.
Yes. You see, that's what the truth is. Right before you. But I can't say it. Yes, please.
It's all a game, a card game,
Yes.
and the awakening is the joker.
Absolutely. You couldn't have put it better. Yes. The awakening is the joke. And that is why, in several cases, when this understanding happens, the body-mind organism through which it has happened starts laughing and cannot control herself or himself. That joke becomes so huge that this laughing starts spontaneously. But it could be the other way around also. That when the understanding, deep understanding happens and the enormity of it is realized, the result can only be tears, which also proves tears of joy or tears of unhappiness are both tears.
Ramesh,
Yes.
this is another question about separation.
Yes.
You say that a created object cannot know the will of the creator subject.
That's right.
That's understandable. And yet, there is no separation between the creator and the created object. They're really the same thing, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So, in some way, the created object, which is the same thing as God or part of God, must in some way know something about God,
No.
being that He is
No.
that.
The created object cannot know anything about the creator subject. But it is the creator who has created the subject.
Yes.
So the subject has not come into being because of anything other than the source. The object that has been created has not come into being because of anyone else or any other thing other than the source. To that extent they are related, but only to that extent, that he is an object and the creator is the subject.
That still, though, it brings in some kind of separation, doesn't it?
Of course there is separation. The manifestation is separation. The very basis of manifestation is duality. The very basis of manifestation and its functioning is the existence of interconnected opposites. Interconnected opposites means duality.
But even duality is an illusion.
If the whole creation is an illusion, everything is an illusion.
Yes.
And the talk we are having is also an illusion.
Yes, it is. But in the person who is awakened,
yes,
there is the seeing through the illusion.
No. All he sees is that it is an illusion. The sage sees this as an illusion.
Yes.
And in that illusion, the sage himself has to play a part. So he plays his part in the illusion, knowing that it is an illusion. But that illusion is based on interconnected opposites. In other words, what I am saying is the sage accepts the duality, accepts the existence of interconnected opposites. And having accepted the existence of interconnected opposites, the sage also accepts that he cannot choose one against the other, because the one cannot exist without the other. So the sage accepts the duality. The ordinary man does not accept the duality. He chooses one against the other, and therefore, while the sage accepts and lives in duality, the ordinary person, having refused duality, lives in dualism, choosing one against the other, and therefore being happy or unhappy. So really what it means is the transformation is from living in dualism to living in duality. You see? And when that living in duality ends, then only the source remains. The unicity remains. When the duality of manifestation is over for that body-mind organism after death, then all that remains is the unicity, the source.
So when the
The
sage,
illusion is gone.
yeah. When the sage then experiences the duality,
Yes.
as opposed to dualism,
Yes.
he cannot experience the unicity.
You see, how can anyone else experience unicity?
And
You
yet
see,
that is all there is.
Unicity is all there is. Whereas someone knowing something means a subject-object relationship. You see, for Robert Wise, that's right, isn't it? For Robert Wise to know Ramesh, Robert Wise has to be the subject, Ramesh has to be the object. For Ramesh to know or understand Robert Wise, Ramesh has to be the subject and Robert Wise the object in a subject-object relationship. Really a pseudo-subject and an object relationship. So when an object wants to know unicity as the subject, this wanting itself, I would call it the original sin. Because the object wanting to know the subject has usurped the subjectivity of the source of unicity, and worse still, turned the unicity into an object which the pseudo-subject wants to know. What can be a greater sin, if there is such a thing as sin?
And if there is no one to know,
Yes.
if the one is not there,
Yeah,
isn't there then just the knowing?
that is correct, and that is self-realization. Just the knowing
Yes.
that all this is an illusion. Knowing the illusion disappears. Seeing something as a trap, the trap doesn't function. Seeing the trap as a trap, the trap doesn't function. You go around it. You don't have to fall in it.
I understand that. And the unicity cannot be seen.
The unicity is unicity.
Yeah.
The unicity can function only as duality. In the classic Hindu terms, unicity is Shiva. Shiva by himself cannot function unless he has his consort Shiva Shakti. Shakti is the energy. So Shiva can only function through his own aspect, the female aspect of energy. You see?
Thank you.
Yes.
So if a sage were a president of a big country,
Yes.
he also would play his role in this dream world?
Of course he would.
And punish and make law
Yes,
and order?
indeed. Now, otherwise, what will mean is a judge who sentences people to death can never be a sage. You see? So, the president of the country will do his job as he sees fit. You see, many years ago, I remember seeing a movie called Gabriel over the White House. Many years ago. I don't know if any one of you remembers. The story was this. The mob, the mafia mob, with its enormous amount of money, puts up a candidate for president and is elected. So there is a huge party at the White House. Huge party with the entire mob being present, you see. And then what happens is, the president, as he is coming down the stairs, misses a step and comes rolling down the steps, hits his head on the ground. When he gets up, something has happened to the brain and he has forgotten all about how he got elected. He is a good president. You see, that is the story. Right. Shall we stop here? There's still 2 more days.